When I retired, my son and his wife suggested, "Mom, what if you help us around the house? You have plenty of free time now. You could spend more time with your grandson and even earn a little extra." First, the idea seemed reasonable. I loved helping my family, and the thought of having a small income was nice. But over time, it stopped feeling like help and turned into servitude. One day, I accidentally overheard my daughter-in-law laughing on the phone. "Oh, now I have a mother-in-law as a housemaid. Free help." Those words burned me inside. Yesterday, I was a mother, the elder in the family, and today a maid. That night I could not sleep. The words housemaid, free help echoed in my head. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking of everything I had poured into their lives. I remembered the house they now lived in. My husband and I saved for 18 long years so our son could have that house. I still recall the day we signed the check. $20,000, nearly every penny I had put aside for my old age. My husband was already gone by then. He left me with modest savings and a promise I carried in my heart: take care of our boy. So I did. After my knee surgeries, when climbing the stairs left me breathless, I still babysat my grandson so they would not have to pay for childcare. I cooked their dinners, folded their laundry, and scrubbed floors that I should never have bent down to touch. I told myself it was family duty, but each month the work multiplied and the gratitude dwindled. And what did I hear in return? "Well, Mom, you understand, we are busy. Do it the way I told you, do not argue." The words were not requests. They were orders. Sometimes I thought about what life could have been if I had kept the money, if I had spent those years differently. Maybe I could have traveled to the seaside towns I always dreamed of. Maybe I could have fixed the leaking roof in my own house sooner. But I did not. Instead, I sat at their kitchen table while my daughter-in-law scrolled on her phone, issuing little commands. "Put more salt in the soup. Do not let him nap now, he will not sleep later. Wipe that counter again, it is streaky." I felt myself shrinking, turning from a mother into something else. Not family, not elder. Something more like hired help, except I was not paid. The loneliness was not only in the work, but in the silence. My son, the boy I raised, said little. If he noticed how his wife spoke to me, he ignored it. If he remembered the $20,000, the years of babysitting, the groceries I bought, he never said so. One afternoon, after scrubbing their floor on aching knees, I sat down heavily on the sofa. My grandson climbed onto my lap. He smiled, soft and innocent, and my heart ached with love for him. He wrapped his small arms around me and whispered, "Grandma, you smell like soap." That moment was pure. But even as I held him, my daughter-in-law's voice rang from the kitchen. "Mom, do not let him get crumbs on that couch. Get a plate." I swallowed hard. I had lost something I could not name. Not only money, not only years, but a piece of myself. The woman who once stood proud, who once was respected, had been chipped down, day after day, into something less. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sit alone in my kitchen and run my hand over the stack of receipts and the notes I had written. Proof that I had given and given until I felt hollow. And yet, to them, I was nothing more than a convenience. A servant without wages. After those words I overheard, I tried to distance myself. I stopped going over every day. I told them my knees hurt, that I needed to rest, that I had errands of my own. In truth, I simply wanted to breathe without being ordered around. It did not take long before the phone calls began. My daughter-in-law was the first. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "Mommy, we miss you so much. Maybe you could come over this weekend? We will have guests and you cook so well." The sweetness in her tone made my skin prickle. I knew that voice. It was the same one she used when she wanted me to drive across town to buy her favorite tea, or to pick up her dress from the dry cleaner. It was not love speaking. It was need. I agreed once or twice, telling myself I was imagining things, but the pattern was clear. She smiled at me in the kitchen, praised my pie in front of guests, and then later I overheard her again, this time in the yard, talking to a neighbor. Her voice carried, sharp with laughter. Can you imagine, she does not even expect thanks? Like a servant. The words fell heavy. She was clever in how she played her roles. In front of me, affectionate, calling me mommy. Behind my back, belittling. A hypocrite with two faces, one for the public, one for me. I started to watch more carefully. She invited me whenever there was work to be done. A party, a family dinner, an event that required shopping, cooking, cleaning. But when there was joy to be shared, an outing, a trip, a holiday photo, my phone stayed silent. The neighbors began to notice too. I would hear their whispers when I walked past the garden fences. Poor woman, always carrying grocery bags for them. She gave them the down payment for that house, did you know? And look how they speak to her. Each word pierced me, not because it was false but because it was true. Others saw what I had tried to hide, even from myself. One afternoon I went over with a small pot of soup. I had made it for my grandson, who had been ill with a cold. When I arrived, I found my daughter-in-law in the living room, scrolling on her phone, while my grandson sat on the floor listless. She looked up and gave me a bright smile. "Mommy, you came just in time. We were about to order food, but now you are here." "Perfect." "No, thank you." "No, how are you?" She simply assumed I would step into the kitchen and start working. Later that evening, when the house was filled with relatives, she poured wine with a smile and announced, "Mom is always here to help. She cannot live without us." There was laughter around the table. My son smiled awkwardly, looking down at his glass. No one defended me. I felt heat rising to my face, but I said nothing. I cleared the plates, washed the dishes, and went home in silence. That night I took out the old photo album again. My husband's face looked back at me from the page. He had been a quiet man, but he had one rule he repeated often: respect is the foundation. Never let anyone trample on you. His voice returned to me with painful clarity, and I knew I was being trampled. The hypocrisy of my daughter-in-law had stripped me of dignity, and my son's silence had made him her accomplice. Still I hesitated. Part of me clung to the role I had been given: to be useful, to be present, to be needed, even if it meant being used. But another part of me, the part that remembered who I once was, had begun to stir. I could see it in small moments. When I refused to answer her calls right away. When I said I had plans, even if those plans were nothing more than sitting alone with a book. When I chose to spend a Sunday in my own home rather than theirs. Every time I said no, even quietly, I felt a piece of myself returning. And yet, the hypocrisy only grew louder. She praised me in front of relatives, telling them how she could not manage without me. While in private she whispered to neighbors about how she had a housemaid in the family. It was a performance she played with perfection, until she began to believe I would never resist. But I was already resisting in ways she had not noticed. I was already gathering strength, preparing for the day when her two faces would be shown to everyone, not just me. That day would come sooner than she expected. One night, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat alone in my kitchen, the clock ticking on the wall, the street lamp outside throwing a pale glow across the table. My body ached from another long day, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I pulled an old photo album from the cabinet and opened it. The pages smelled faintly of dust and time. There we were, my husband and I, standing in our first small apartment, both of us smiling in front of the peeling wallpaper. We had nothing then but each other. His arm was tight around my shoulders, his eyes steady, and I could almost hear his voice. "The most important thing is respect. Never let anyone trample on you." I touched the photo and felt tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. Somewhere along the way I had forgotten that lesson. I had traded respect for usefulness, love for labor, and I had convinced myself it was enough. But it was not enough. I thought of the years I had given. The $20,000 that vanished into their mortgage, the countless meals, the hours of cleaning, the care for my grandson even when my knees screamed with pain. I thought of the words whispered behind my back, servant, housemaid, and the silence of my son, who should have been the one to defend me. It struck me with sudden clarity. I was not part of a family. I was part of a transaction. And my worth had been reduced to what I could do, not who I was. That night I closed the album, wiped my eyes, and made a decision. It would stop. I would no longer be the maid. I would no longer be the wallet. I would no longer be the silent presence they leaned on without gratitude. The next morning when my phone buzzed with a message, "Mom, can you come over to help with the party this weekend?" I stared at it for a long moment. My hand trembled slightly, but my voice was steady when I called back. "No, I have my own plans." There was a pause on the other end. Then my daughter-in-law's cheerful tone cracked just slightly. like a mask slipping. Oh well, maybe another time then. But I heard the edge beneath her voice. A few days later the whispers began. A neighbor approached me while I was tending the small flowers by my window box. Why did you upset your son and his wife? They say you have become strange, pushing everyone away. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my voice calm. People change, I suppose. Inside though, the words stung. It was not enough that I had been their servant. Now they would paint me as unwell, unreasonable, selfish. Even my son confronted me one evening when he stopped by unannounced. He stood in my kitchen, his eyes narrowed. Mom, what does it cost you to help? We are family. His words were not a plea. They were a demand. I looked at him, my only child, the boy I had raised, and I realized he no longer saw me as a mother. He saw me as a resource. Something to be managed, used, and kept in place. The disappointment was sharper than any pain in my knees. Still I remained calm. I stirred the tea I had made for myself and said nothing. His frustration grew, but I did not yield. When he left, slamming the door harder than necessary, I stood at the window for a long time, staring at the quiet street below. For the first time in years I felt something like strength returning. I had said no, and I had meant it. The road ahead would not be easy. I knew they would try to pressure me, to guilt me, to twist the story so that I looked like the selfish one. But deep down I also knew the truth. I was not selfish. I had given more than enough. What I was reclaiming now was not greed. It was dignity. And once dignity is taken back, it cannot be surrendered again. After that evening, when I told them I had my own plans, the air between us shifted. It was subtle at first, but I felt it. My daughter-in-law's cheerful tone grew tighter, her smiles more strained. My son's visits became less about conversation and more about questioning, as though I were a wayward child who needed to be corrected. They invited me again soon after, this time for another party. A birthday, they said, a small gathering of friends. I was expected to cook, set the table, and keep my grandson occupied while they entertained. I let her finish speaking before I answered. No, I will not be coming. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long. Finally she spoke, her voice brittle. You sound tired, Mommy. Maybe you are just having a bad week. But I heard the sharpness hidden beneath the sugar. Not long after, a neighbor approached me as I watered the flowers outside my window. Why did you upset your son and his wife? They say you have changed, that you are pushing everyone away. The words stung, though I kept my composure. People say many things, I replied. Sometimes what they say reveals more about them than about me. The neighbor looked uneasy and quickly changed the subject, but the seed of doubt lingered. They were already spinning stories to protect themselves, painting me as strange, unstable, or unkind. Then came my son. One evening, he appeared at my door without calling first. He carried himself like a man already weary of the discussion, his jaw set, his voice low but pressing. Mom, what does it cost you to help? We are family. He leaned against the doorway as though blocking my escape, his eyes searching mine. I saw no kindness in them, only expectation. The words sounded rehearsed, not spoken from the heart. I stood at the kitchen counter, my hands folded over the cup of tea I had poured for myself. I met his gaze calmly. I have given plenty. He frowned, almost as if I had spoken in a language he could not understand. It is not about giving. It is about family. We rely on you. I let the words hang in the air before answering. Family does not rely on one person alone. His shoulders stiffened. For a moment I thought he might shout. Instead, he exhaled sharply, set his hands on his hips, and muttered, You are making this harder than it needs to be. I said nothing. Silence is sometimes sharper than any reply. He turned and left, the door closing louder than necessary behind him. After he left, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen and realized how far we had fallen. My son no longer came to see me with warmth. He came with demands, expectations, pressure. It was as if the roles had reversed. I was the one expected to obey. Days passed and the pressure grew. My phone filled with calls and messages. Some were sweet. My daughter-in-law using that sugary voice. Mommy, we miss you so much. The house feels empty without you. Others were sharper. Mom, answer your phone. We need to talk. Why are you avoiding us? First I ignored them. Then, when silence seemed not enough, I answered briefly, always with calm words that left no room for argument. I am busy. I have my own plans. Not today. Each no seemed to unsettle them more than any storm could have. The neighbors grew bolder too. A woman from across the street stopped me at the mailbox. They say you do not come over anymore. That you have become distant. Are you not afraid of being alone? I gave her a thin smile. I have been alone for a long time. Her expression faltered. She had no reply. Inside my apartment, I began to breathe more freely. For the first time in years, my days were mine. I brewed tea in the morning and drank it while it was still hot, not cold and forgotten on a counter while I ran errands for someone else. I cooked for myself simple meals and ate them slowly. I read books without guilt. Yet even in that freedom, a shadow hung over me. I knew they would not stop easily. People who grow used to taking do not surrender their comforts without a fight. And I was right. One Sunday afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, there stood my daughter-in-law, holding my grandson's hand. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. "Mommy, we thought we would surprise you." She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her. My grandson ran ahead, delighted, but she remained in the doorway, her smile fixed like porcelain. "We have missed you so much," she said sweetly. "The house is not the same without you." I stood still, my hands clasped. "I have been resting." Her smile did not waver, but her voice grew firmer. "Owen works so hard. And I do too. You know we need you. You are part of our family." I met her eyes steady. "I am part of this family, yes. But I am not your maid." The smile cracked. Her lips pressed tight for a moment, then she laughed lightly, as though I had made a small joke. But I saw the flicker of anger beneath. That evening, after they left, I sat in my quiet living room and felt the weight of what was coming. The more I said no, the harder they would push. Their comfort depended on my silence, my labor, my money. And now I had withdrawn all three. I knew it would not end with pleading or guilt alone. People like them, who relied on another's sacrifices without gratitude, would soon turn to sharper tools. Lies, manipulation, even slander. But I was ready. Because once you reclaim your dignity, you do not give it back. I thought I had already seen the worst of their hypocrisy. I believed I knew every corner of their demands, every mask they wore. But life has its way of showing what is hidden. It happened by accident. One afternoon, my grandson came running into my apartment with his small backpack. His parents had dropped him off without notice, as usual, and left quickly, saying they had errands. He spilled his toys across the floor, laughing while I made us tea and sandwiches. Hours later, when his mother returned to collect him, she spoke on the phone as she stepped into the doorway. Her voice was sharp, filled with impatience. She did not realize that her son, curious and playful, had been pressing buttons on her phone moments before. He had accidentally started the voice recorder. I discovered it later, after he had gone. He had left the phone in my chair. When I picked it up to call him back, the recording was still running. Out of habit, I pressed play. Her words poured into my quiet kitchen, clear and cutting. "She will work for me as long as she has strength. And when she cannot anymore, we will put her in a nursing home." I froze. The teacup trembled in my hand, spilling a few drops onto the tablecloth. I sat there listening again, letting the words replay until they etched themselves into me like a brand. Work for me. Not help, not family, but work. And when I was spent, when my body finally failed, they would discard me in a place for the unwanted. I saved the recording at once. My fingers did not shake as I transferred it to my own phone. Then to a small flash drive I kept in the drawer with my important papers. My late husband's pension documents, our marriage certificate, the deed to the apartment. Now this recording joined them, evidence of the truth I had known in my bones but had never been able to prove. The next day my daughter-in-law called me again, her voice sweet as honey. "Mommy, we are planning a family dinner this weekend. Please come. Everyone will be there." I agreed. Not because I wished to cook or to clean, or to sit quietly while they paraded me as the helpful mother. I agreed because I knew what I carried in my pocket would end their charade. In the days that followed, I prepared myself. I replayed the recording each night, letting the words steal me. I thought of all the sacrifices that had brought me here. The money I had given, the years of labor, the humiliation I had endured. And I thought of the future they imagined for me. Locked away, forgotten, discarded. No. The time had come to let others hear the truth with their own ears. That Saturday I dressed carefully. Not in my usual plain clothes, but in a blouse my husband once loved, with pearl buttons that glowed softly in the light. I combed my hair, put on the small gold earrings my mother gave me when I turned 18, and slipped the phone into my purse. At the dinner table, my daughter-in-law played her part perfectly. She poured wine, offered smiles, touched my arm gently as though we were close. She raised her glass and said for all to hear, "Mom and I are always together. I will always protect her." The relatives nodded, murmuring their approval. My son sat beside her, his eyes fixed on his plate, not meeting mine. I waited for the right moment. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the chatter about work and children filled the room. Then, in the middle of her speech about family unity, I opened my purse, pulled out my phone and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room, sharp and undeniable. "She will work for me as long as she has strength. And when she cannot anymore, we will put her in a nursing home." The words rang out, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the small gasps that escaped from around the table. Silence fell. Forks froze halfway to mouths. My son's head dropped, his face pale. My daughter-in-law's smile collapsed, her cheeks burning red, her eyes darting desperately across the table. There was no escape, no denial, no excuse. The evidence was too clear. I placed the phone calmly on the table. This is how she speaks of me when she thinks I cannot hear. No one spoke. The air was thick, heavy with shame that was not mine to carry anymore. For the first time in years I felt taller, stronger. Not because I had hurt her, but because the truth had finally been heard. The silence after the recording ended was unlike any silence I had ever known. It was not peaceful. It was not calm. It was the silence of masks shattering, of people realizing they had been caught. My daughter-in-law sat frozen, her hand still around her wineglass. Her face was flushed deep red, as though the heat of her own words had risen to burn her. She opened her mouth once, twice, but no sound came. My son kept his eyes fixed on his plate. He did not move, did not speak. His shoulders hunched, as if by lowering his head he could hide from the truth spilling into the room. The rest of the table, uncles, cousins, neighbors, stared between us, their forks suspended in midair. No one dared to break the heavy quiet. Finally I spoke. My voice was steady, quiet, but it carried through the room like a stone thrown into still water. This is how she sees me. Not as family, not as a mother, as labor. And when the labor is finished, I am to be put away. The words hung there, undeniable. My daughter-in-law found her voice at last. She laughed, brittle and forced. It was a joke, a misunderstanding. You know how recordings can be. But even she heard how empty her defense sounded. The recording had been clear, her voice sharp, her intention unmistakable. One of the cousins shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I heard it clearly," he said. "That was no joke." A murmur ran around the table. Heads nodded. Eyes turned back to her, no longer with admiration, but with suspicion. She placed the glass down too hard and it rattled against the table. Her voice rose, sharp now, trying to seize control of the narrative. "You are twisting this. You do not understand the pressure we live under, the demands, the constant strain." I was only venting. Her words spilled fast, desperate, but no one moved to defend her. I sat still, hands folded neatly in my lap. My calmness made her frantic energy seem all the more guilty. My son finally lifted his head. His face was pale, his lips tight. For a moment I thought he might defend me, but instead he muttered, "Mom, why would you bring this up here? Why embarrass us in front of everyone?" I turned to him, my voice cold and even. "I did not embarrass you." Her words did. "I only let others hear what I have lived with for years." He had no reply. His eyes dropped once again, shame coloring his silence. Across the table, one of the neighbors, a woman who had often whispered gossip by the fence, shook her head slowly. "We always wondered why you looked so tired. Now we know." My daughter-in-law snapped toward her. "You have no right." But the neighbor cut her off. "Respect is a right. And it seems you forgot that." The room shifted. The weight that had been mine alone for so long was suddenly shared, spread out across every shocked face around the table. The truth was no longer just in my hands. It lived in the ears and eyes of everyone present. My daughter-in-law stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. "This dinner is over." She stormed toward the kitchen, her heels striking the tiles like hammers. My son sat motionless, caught between loyalty to his wife and the shame of what had been revealed. I rose slowly, my hand steady as I gathered my purse. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it carried enough weight to leave no doubt. "I am done. I will not work for you. I will not finance you. My money is off the table." The words fell like a verdict. I walked out of the dining room, past the rows of shocked faces, past my son's lowered head, past the kitchen where my daughter-in-law muttered curses under her breath. I stepped into the cool evening air, and for the first time in years I felt light. Behind me I could hear voices rising, questions being asked, explanations demanded. But that was no longer my concern. The evidence had spoken louder than I ever could. And now the burden was no longer mine. I never went back to their house after that night. The recording had done what my words alone could not. It stripped away their pretense. My son called in the following weeks, his voice hesitant, his words carefully chosen. Sometimes he asked how I was. Sometimes he asked if I needed anything. But the weight of our conversations had changed. Now I answered only when I wished to, and I kept my replies short. As for my daughter-in-law, she did not call. Her silence was louder than all her sweet words had ever been. I felt no anger in the days that followed, only a strange stillness. The years of exhaustion, the endless errands, the demands that filled my every waking moment, all of it had fallen away. My life, though quieter, was mine again. Each morning I carried my teapot to the balcony. I poured a cup of tea, sat in my chair, and looked at the garden below. The roses I had planted years ago were beginning to bloom again, their red petals opening toward the sun. Birds sang in the branches, children's laughter echoed from the street, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to simply listen. I no longer kept receipts in envelopes. I no longer tracked hours in a notebook. I no longer begged for scraps of respect from those who would not give it. The scars remain, I will not deny that. Betrayal leaves its marks. But those scars remind me of a lesson my husband once spoke, a lesson I had nearly forgotten. Respect is the foundation, and once it is gone, everything built on top of it will crumble. Now, when I think of myself, I no longer see a maid or a servant or a woman defined by what she gives. I see a mother who finally drew her line, a woman who chose to stand again. I am not a servant. I am a woman who has found her place again. And in the quiet of my balcony, with the garden below and the sun warming my face, that is enough. Each story is a piece of life, and together they create something greater. If this one left a mark on you, please support it with a like and subscribe to stay close for the next one. In the comments, let us meet and share your experiences, your feelings, your voice. Because this channel is not only mine, it is ours.